LFOs, which means low frequency oscillators. So before I go wild with that, let me get my screen up for comments. And thanks for watching these, everybody. I'm glad you're hanging out with me and having a good time doing some sound. Picking up some tips on what to do, especially with the operator synth, because in Ableton, operator is not the easiest one to jump in and just play with. You probably noticed it's like, what is this thing? But we're going to figure it out. We'll show you a couple little things you can do with LFOs to make bass wubs today. That's super fun. And also actually LFOs, what we're going to do is could turn into FM synthesis too. So if you like that kind of robotic 8-bit sound of like tweaking out your sounds, we're going to work on that. Who's here? Let me get my comment screen up. Just got to like refresh on my monitor screen. How y'all doing with your quarantine? Everybody going a little crazy at home? I know it's a weird thing. Okay, so there's that. Click to expand. How y'all doing with your quarantine, everybody? Quarantine, yeah, yay. Who's here? Let me know who's here. I can't see your names, but I can see that somebody's watching. Say hi. Let me know if you can hear. Oh my God, what is going on? Let me know if you can hear me and the music at the right level so I can talk and go full screen and start teaching about LFOs. Comment screen is up. Get these chats out of here. Got the phone on vibrate, I think. All right. So let's hop in. There we go, and here's the Ableton screen. I think I'm going to stop the beats at first, and let's do a little bit of a review. So here is an instrument. First, I'm going to turn off the LFOs. And, oh, Chad, a nurse not stuck at home. Wow, props to you, man, on doing the work. Congratulations or respect. That's serious business. Hope you have enough masks and gloves and everything, too. So on day one, we started with the basic unit of sound, which is the oscillator. So in the operator synth, I turned off all the other options. So we're only working with one oscillator, keep it nice and simple. And down here, you can pick which one you want. So the very most basic one is sine wave. It's kind of a soft tone, it just sounds like pitch. You play a note, get a pitch. And by the way, in modular synths, even having the ability to do MIDI control to choose a pitch, to choose a note from a keyboard is like an operation you have to set up. So we've got the sine wave pitch, and I'm gonna work with triangle wave. What's the saw wave sound like? Let's just listen to a couple. So saw wave, a little bit buzzier. Yurka's here, what's up, man? Square wave, even buzzier than the other one. And you can draw in your own harmonics and hear what they sound like. How about triangle wave? Like a sine wave, but not exactly the same. On day two, we talked about filters, which are a way to do subtractive synthesis by cutting off some of the tone. Okay, so a subtractive synthesis at the beginning, we just have a pure tone. On, off, makes a sound. And then if you want to shape it to be a little different tone, you can apply a filter and cut off maybe the high frequencies using a low pass filter, or you could put in maybe a band pass filter, find a place in the mid-range of the sound where a band of frequencies are passing. And this is subtractive synthesis because we're basically cutting off part of the frequency range with filters. Joff Baker, I'm watching just at home. All right, let me know if the audio sounds okay with the mix of volume and music, sound, and voice, because I want to make sure you can hear what I'm doing. Subtractive synthesis. Yesterday we worked with envelopes. We found out some stuff like if you have a really short attack time, it can make a click at the beginning of the sound. I hear it right there. So you go up to around 5, 6, 7 milliseconds attack time. Get rid of that click, and you can still have a nice, like, percussive, accurate start of the sound. The sound comes out right when you press the note. Likewise, the attack is a time, decay is a time. You're not going to hear the decay time if you have the sustain level all the way up. Joff says, audio is good, thank you, that's really helpful. Glad to hear that. Yurko, thank you too, Yurko. If you want to hear the decay time, you have to bring your sustain level down. Remember, in the ADSR world, attack is a time, decay is a time, sustain is a level, and release is a time. So you can make a sound with only the attack and the decay part of the envelope. But let's have the sustain level up. And a long enough release that when I press the note, it keeps coming out. And also we found a problem with a click at the end of the note. If your release time is too short, you get a click, which is no good. And since I'm playing some bass notes and I want to be able to hear this, let's get our sustain level up. And there we go with a bass sound. So that's a basic thing we did with some picking the oscillator, playing with the filter, and getting the ADSR envelope to work. And by the way, remember the amp has an ADSR envelope, so does the filter. You can play with attack, decay, sustain, release in the filter envelope. The LFO, believe it or not, has another envelope. So envelopes are super useful. They're not only for volume. They do work in many other places. Some synthesizers will give you an external ADSR envelope that you could route to anything you want. So you could put it into something else like pan position or the level, the balance of your oscillator volumes, like which one's coming in and out. And they're really useful for making your sounds develop over time. Quick little moment here. I like to go back on camera on these, so if you're scanning through, you can come back and catch the pro tips. The goal of sound design is to make original sounds that sound like yourself or your expression, or they sound like nothing anybody else have ever heard before. That's when you have the most fun making your tracks, and when you make tracks that people are going to react to. The goal here is to make a piece of music that when people hear it, they're like, oh, I know who that track came from. If you're making your own original sounds, you can develop a signature style. So when people hear it, they're going to know it's you, and they want to play it again, and they want to get another track from you. And it's like, it's unique, you know, it's like your thing. It's not just like, oh, I bought a preset and I made it into a track with a loop from a loop pack. Like, that's not original. That's like, you know, whatever, something else. So the goal of sound design is to make original sounds. That's what I want to get you going here with. And now that we have a basic sound, we can get into LFO. So LFO is low frequency oscillator. Our basic oscillator is a pitch that we can hear. And now we're going to use the second one, the LFO, as a modulator to change something in the first sound. So the LFO means, low frequency part means we're not going to actually hear it like a pitch. We're going to feel it as an effect that's doing something to change the first sound. So I routed some macros here. In the LFO section, we hear something happening. We turn up the amount, we click on the LFO panel, make sure we're looking at these controls in the middle for the LFO. And where does the LFO amount change? Well, destination A, destination B, and A has the filter switch turned on. Destination B is up. Okay, now this is zeroed out. I'm trying to create problems and tell you how to solve them. So the first problem here is that I turned up the LFO amount, but I don't hear anything. That's really frustrating, and that's a very common thing to happen in a synth, where you go to the modulators and you're like, yeah, I want to make some wubs, I want the sound going all over the place, it's going to be awesome. And you play your note and you turn up your LFO rate and you get nothing. It's so annoying. The reason is synthesizers consider this LFO like a modulator is like a source. So it's like if you have hot sauce on the table and you're like, yeah, I have all the hot sauce, but if you don't actually tell the hot sauce bottle what plate to go on, then you're not going to get any because you only have the hot sauce, but you didn't actually put it on the food. So you have to tell the LFO destination, I want you to modulate the filter, and you turn on this filter switch right here. That way the LFO that's changing, you're going to hear it with LFO modulating the filter frequency. So let's turn up the amount. If you see inside the operator window where the amount is changing, destination A, that means this source is going to this destination by that amount, and it's going to hit the filter. Don't worry if this is confusing, it'll make sense after we do it a couple more times. I had to set it up to somewhere so we could hear the rate, and you'll get the picture of what's happening. So now you see the rate is moving. I've got a macro knob for it, but it's this little control right here. And let's make this fun with some beats, right? So you can hear the LFO is synced in time with the beat, and when we change the rate, we can make it even faster. So that might not be the coolest sound in the world yet, but it's getting there. What we're doing is making the oscillator pulse by using the LFO to change the filter frequency. So let's do another example here. Instead of having it go up to the first option of destination A with the filter, we're going to pick destination B, and we're just going to set it to oscillator volume A. When you have the list of volume A, B, C, D, that's telling you it's like these different oscillators. It's going to modulate the volume. So we have LFO as the source, excuse me, and the destination is volume A. So when I turn up the amount, it's making that get quieter and louder. And again, we can change the rate. Now another thing we can do that's kind of fun is change our LFO waveform. When it's a sine wave, it's going to be smooth motion of up and down. What if we go to square wave? Ooh. That gives you an on and off sound, because when the square wave is up, it goes on. When the square wave is down, it goes off. The volume gets modulated down. And there's nothing in between. It goes straight from one parameter or one extreme to the other. So that can be kind of fun. And this is a little weird for me to do like finger drumming and playing on the beat, because the streaming software has a tiny time lag that messes up my quantizing in my headphones. So it sounds a little like wonky, but that's the reason why. What I want you to understand is that the LFO waveform has a really big effect on the sound. So the LFO is the source. We're modulating the volume of this oscillator. And when we choose a different waveform, it changes the volume according to the shape of the oscillator. So triangle is like sine wave, but it has kind of like more defined transition between one side and the other. And then we can do sawtooth, which starts low and goes higher. Sawtooth up, sawtooth down. And then finally sample and hold, which is a really cool waveform. That's a classic kind of a shape from electronic music, where sample and hold, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like if there's a sine wave happening and it takes a little snapshot at different values along the sine wave, it kind of jumps in between different settings from high to low. It feels random. So think of sample and hold as kind of like a random thing. And what's really fun is if we combine modulating the volume at the same time as filter. Let's hear what that sounds like. Aha. And let me just pose another problem here for you. Remember at the beginning, we got our oscillator tone. I turned up the LFO amount. Oh my God, nothing's happening. Why not? Because we didn't map it to a destination. So now with destination A, I'm going to tell it to go to the filter, right? I still don't really hear anything. You know, like, what's going on? I got my LFO, it's turned on, the amount is up, it's mapped to the filter, got the filter switch on to map it there. How come I don't hear the damn thing? Well, the reason is, if your filter is wide open, this is a low pass filter and it's all the way up, that means there's nothing getting cut off. You're hearing the whole tone already, so the LFO kind of has nothing to modulate. Ricardo Diaz, what's up, man? Thanks for being here. So in order to hear your LFO modulating your filter frequency, you have to bring your baseline frequency down so that the LFO can take it up and down, and then you'll hear it. You see, if the filter frequency is all the way up, the LFO is trying to modulate it, and it's like, oh, I'm stuck against the wall. It's like if you're literally like, I don't know, I can't think of another example, but it just doesn't have any room to move. So you got to put your baseline settings down a little bit, and then the LFO can modulate them. Sample and hold sounds kind of good, a little bit faster. So let's go back to, if we do a slow sawtooth wave going up with a real wet resonance, I'm gonna hit the beats. What if that wants to be a little faster? All right. So, okay, so I just got a little bit lost in the beat right there. I love those kind of sounds. What we're doing here is we're layering up modulators. So we're not just changing one thing. We have one LFO and it's got the rate and the shape and we dialed it in. Now we're sending it to the filter to make this filter frequency go up and down in a sawtooth pattern. We're also sending it to the volume to make the volume of the bass sound change, going from low to high in a sawtooth pattern to get this. And we covered how you have to move your baseline position so that you hear something, and of course a little wet resonance on your filter. Whoa, sorry. That's that high range squeaky thing. That makes it a little easier to really define what you're hearing and pick it out. A couple other things that we can go into deeper. How are we all? About 20 minutes so far. There's this LFO retrigger switch that's right there in the middle of the LFO panel. This lets you define, do you want the LFO to start in the same exact position every time? Let me make this slow, and then I'll play a bunch of notes. So when you have the retrigger off, every time you play the note, it's like there's a free range LFO going on, and it just picks up wherever it left off before. Which is kind of cool. It could be useful, but if you're doing baseline notes and you want the same exact sound every time, you got to turn the retrigger on so that every note gets a fresh LFO wave so that this upward sawtooth shape is going to hit exactly at the beginning of every note. Same sound every time, even if it's fast. So that's an important little detail, and I cover this more in depth in the hands-on lesson where you can go through it with interactive guidance and all that kind of stuff. So give me a yes if you are down with what we're doing so far. I want to move on and show you a couple of examples where I used LFOs in my sounds in this session. But before I move on to that, I'm going to take a little coffee moment to take a sip here. Type in a yes if you're okay so far. I want to make sure this is making sense. Daniel, hey, hello, and everybody in the workshop, thanks for being here. Just type in a quick yes if you understand what we did with our quick review. So we took our oscillator, we picked a waveform, and then I did a little bit of an ADSR envelope to make the sound work, and I did a little tiny bit of tone shaping with the filter frequency, subtractive synthesis. And then once we had a basic sound that was working, we could turn up our LFO parameter. Oh no, I don't hear anything. How come? Because we have to route it to a destination. Oh, and you know what I did? I forgot about this. Joff says yes. All right, cool. I'll take that as a yes for the group. I put a spectrum analyzer on here to show a little picture of how the waveforms are moving. So this one is real clear. You can hear the sawtooth wave going up, and you can kind of see the frequency jumping around like that. What if we go to the triangle wave? You can see those frequencies moving, and maybe to make it even more obvious, I'm going to turn on, in destination A, I turned on the switch to control the pitch of this oscillator. Check this out. Pitch madness. What about sine wave? Square wave. Very on and off kind of shape. Triangle. Sawtooth down. Dive bomb. Look how that hits the bottom of the bass range. Oh my gosh. Woof. Total dive bomb. And for a sample and hold, it's going to be like the garbled kind of bubbly sound. Does not compute, error, defect. So I hope you get the sense of what those different waveforms do as an LFO. They're really fun to play around with. And honestly, when you put your LFO connected to pitch, you go into a completely new universe of sound. In fact, I'm going to transition now and stop talking about LFOs and start talking about just frequency modulation. Right now I'm changing the LFO range, and there's this little parameter in here with H, S, and L. That means a high range LFO, high range LFO, low range, and sync. Synchronized is where you get the beat match control. Low range is where it's not on the grid, but it's like slow enough that it works as a, well, LFO basically. Get off that waveform. And what I mean when I say slow is that you can hear each pulse individually. But when we put the range up to high, it's faster than you can hear individually. And you're getting into frequency modulation or FM synthesis. Maybe if I open up the filter a little bit, we'll hear that better. Yeah. That LFO is going so fast it sounds like a different pitch. It sounds like two pitches playing together and interfering with each other in that classic FM synthesis sound. Andy May, late to the party. What's up, man? You can watch the replay. I actually did a bunch of review in the beginning of today, Andy, so you didn't miss a whole lot. And we're doing some LFO routing. We just got into the FM synthesis part where the LFO, or the second oscillator, now we have to talk about this like a new oscillator, is interfering with the first one. To make this kind of a sound. How cool is that? You could use that all day long to make interesting sounds for yourself. Even better is put a little reverb on there. And you could be smart and unmute your reverb. Be like me, don't mute your reverb. Welcome to my spaceship. We're going through outer space. I don't know, this stuff just activates my imagination. Every different sound we make, I get an idea for like, oh, I want to use this like this, or use it in even like in a little skit or something like that. So FM synthesis by choosing your LFO range to be high, low, or synchronized. And for bass wubs, you want to leave it on this S setting for synchronizing your LFO with the beat of the track. You know, all day long, play around, get some wubs happening, and it takes a simple, boring oscillator and suddenly makes it crazy interesting. And as a general rule, multiple modulators are a good way to do it. So you can line up, you know, modulating your filter and your volume at the same time. And if you throw in pitch on there, it's like, it's going crazy. Tweak your filter while you're playing with your LFO, and it's going to be interesting to listen to all the way through your track. Key moment, keep your music interesting all the way through to the end. That's what makes people love your music and want to play it again, and then they want to be the person who plays that track at the party so that everybody at the party can love that music, and they'll be like, yes, I just brought that track. So, you know, that's what we're trying to get to here, is music that people really, really enjoy and sounds original, sounds fresh, doesn't sound stale, sounds like you, sounds unique. Develop your own signature style in your production and get there by using LFOs. So, all right, that's enough about general LFO theory. Let me reset back to my original tempo. I put this track at 110, and it was actually not a breakbeat jam at first. It was something that sounds a little bit like this. So what's happening? We got a baseline wub, right? It's not like dubstep wub, but it's a little bit wubby. So what are we doing? Quarter notes. I mean, absolutely the dumbest, most boring musician pattern there is. But when I just turn on this LFO, it starts to get interesting. It's routed to the filter. Add some resonance so it's nice and wet. And where else is it going? Oh, destination B is the volume on the first oscillator. That means this oscillator, that volume right there, is getting changed by the LFO. Oops, not. And you got to turn up the destination amount so that your LFO is changing two things. So the LFO is in place. It's doing eighth note motion. It's restarting the LFO on every pulse, so the bass goes wop wop. It's a sine wave pattern. The global LFO is turned up 100%, so it's going to work. Then we route it to the filter, which means this little guy right here. And we turn the filter setting, so the LFO is going to change the filter as much as it possibly can. And we, in our list of options for destination B, look at all this. We could do pan position. We could do all these different things, filter drive, FM drive, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to set it to volume and turn that up to 100% so that the LFO modulates the filter and the volume. What if we did square wave? Now this is kind of interesting. It's a great place to illustrate the difference between a sine wave and a triangle wave. The sine wave makes the pulse feel like it's kind of on the beat, right? Wop, 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 wop. When I go to triangle wave, all of a sudden it's not on the beat. And well, I mean, it's on the beat, but it's not in the groove because the shape of the triangle makes that filter sweep happen a little bit late and it's kind of wonky, right? It's like quat, quat, quat. It's like, ew, I don't like that. So that's a good place to illustrate how your wave shapes connect to a feel. Because in music, feel is everything. Your audience does not give a flying fuck if you have a triangle wave, a sine wave, or any other ocean wave. They don't know. They just want it to feel good. And me being me, I wanted this to be low end also. So I've got another instrument. I'll turn off that side chain so it's super clear. And that's going to be on sine wave also. And strategically what I'm doing here is I have one mono sub mixed with the kick drum. I'll even turn that up a little bit because I'm in headphones. And it's a little tricky to hear that, right? Because it's so low, it's like a low wubby wub. So I doubled it with another bass line at a higher octave. So together, they layer up and make the sound. So this is like, this higher one is identifying, you know, like the pitch of the sound, and the you can hear the filter happening, you can hear that like mid-range tone. It is up in just octave 1, D1, and then this one is D0. This is a little bit more of an advanced thing. I'm kind of talking about mixing, but as a sound design strategy, if you're making some wubs and you love them soloed, but they're not coming through the mix quite enough, you know, like, I mean, it's down there, but if you're not listening on a subwoofers, you might not perceive it. So all you do is take your track, duplicate it, Command D, right here, and then in the other one, you select your MIDI clip, go here, do select all, and then you can do a key command of Shift Command up. And sorry, that might be a Mac user key command. I'm not sure what it is on PC, but I'm doing Shift Command up arrow and Shift Command down arrow to move my MIDI notes into a different part. The reason I'm doing this is I wanted to double the low bass line and put it in a higher octave so I could hear it in the mix and get more of it because it sounds cool. So we got these two bass parts synchronized, doing their thing, and I used LFOs to make that happen. with a modulator, right? LFOs are modulating, filter, and volume. So that's example one. Give me a yes if you get that example, because that could be useful for you. Next example is a pad sound. And this is a real classic LFO modulator shape. If you remember, I was talking about it as a bubbling sound or a random sound. When you hear that kind of thing where the frequency is jumping all over, it's like nino, nino. Daniel says, yes, thank you. When you hear that random type of sound, that is the classic sample and hold pattern that's great for electronic music. And I put it on a pad because here was our sound first. That's a lot of pad. That's filling up the whole sound. I don't want it to be there the whole time. But if I turn it down, it's like not really solving the problem, you know? I can't make this pad sound interesting by making it quieter or louder. Something about it, I want it to be moving, you know? I like it if it's swelling, or what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I got a creative problem. This sound is not doing it for me. The problem is, how do I make this sound more interesting so it catches your ear in the mix and does something cool, and I don't have to sit here with my hand on the fader moving it up and down to make it interesting? Well, the solution to that problem for now is gonna be to turn on this LFO. And again, it's routed to the filter and the volume. This time I'm using a bandpass filter. And remember, if your frequency is all the way up in one direction, the LFO is not going to have any space to modulate it, so you're not going to hear very much. So set your baseline somewhere in the middle so that the LFO can take the frequency and move it around. And of course, little resonance doesn't hurt. So what we got so far is we used LFOs to make a little baseline pulse. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So instead of a boring baseline note that just goes blah, 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 now we have something going whoop, whoop, whoop. More interesting. Same thing with this pad synth. Instead of having this, we have this. Next. Now I'm getting a little bit tricky because the LFO is off in operator. We're not modulating anything with the operator controls, but I have good old auto pan. So that's our sound, and in the mix, problem solving. What's the problem? I don't know if I want this in the center. I don't know, maybe if I don't know, could I do this? Like pan them opposite? I mean, maybe that's the right solution, but if I like having it on both sides and I can't make up my mind, I'm just gonna put on auto pan and have it on both sides. And how do I do that? Well, here's the key. You've got waveforms down here, which tells you there's an oscillator somewhere in this device, and we're gonna make it work. So I set it, instead of free run, I put it on synchronized, choose a slow rate, so it's gonna go back and forth. I bent the shape so it's almost like a square wave, so it's a very clear difference between the right and left speaker. And then the offset changes like kind of like which speaker it starts in. And that's not the most important control. If you remember your polar coordinates from geometry class, you want to go for the 90-degree things to tell the LFO where to start, and that'll give you kind of control of like which ear you hear it in first when you press play. And all we're doing on this whole operation here is just problem solving. Like, first I had a bass line, it was kind of a flat, boring tone, so I used an LFO to make it wobble a little bit. The pad sound was a flat, boring tone, and I used an LFO to make it bubble. Like that. Now this little inner melody voice thing was sort of just hanging out in the center too much and getting on my last nerve. So I said, hey, put it on the auto panner and get it moving that way. So that's a quick example of what you can do with LFOs in your sound design world to make your sounds more interesting. Why do we want interesting sounds? Because you want your tracks to sound original. You want them to sound like there is a creative person inside the music doing things to make the sound interesting all the way to the end of the track. So like, I set up all these LFOs to do cool stuff, but that doesn't mean I leave them parked in place for the whole entire track. Like as I'm developing this piece of music, I'm gonna take my filters and move them around by hand so that they're changing and shifting and oozing and evolving, building up to a climax. Somebody said a climax earlier in the comments. Was that Daniel? Oh, Ricardo, good for a build-up. Yeah, you know, like setting your LFOs and your sound design in place for your basic instruments is like step one. And then as you're laying out your composition, you can choose moments in the track to take one of your sounds and tweak it out and break it, like speed up your LFO and slow it down, or take your filter settings and move them in one way or another, or maybe you could leave a sound panned in the center for most of the track and then have it start to go left and right at a critical moment. So it keeps drawing people in, like every time there's a drop, maybe have a different variation of a sound so that it's more interesting. Or maybe don't have all your sounds in at every drop, like drop one has just the basics, the next drop has like another synth that's doing something cool. And that's how your sound design can turn into composition, which is the next step. Like, don't just put all your sounds in at the same time and leave it there for 3 minutes. That'd be a boring loop, right? Think about it like, if you really put a lot of work into designing each sound, the sound should be so good it can be a track by itself. Like that one sound with a drum beat could be something you listen to. And that's how good your sounds can be. So you do that like a drum beat and a bass line and you're done, that's music. Now you add drum beat and like that melody synth, cut the bass line out, it's still good. Drop the bass line in, people lose their mind. You know, it all works together. You go from sound design into finding ways to show your cool sound design, which is essentially composition. Like, how do I make this sound awesome in the music? How do I present this sound in the best way? Should it be a breakdown? Should it be the main drop? Or should I save it for the ending so there's like a secret weapon at the end of the track with a new cool sound? Yo, Burke Frolic is here. Yo, man. Hey, you came in kind of at the end, but we're going to go to replay in a second. 12:40, yep, good. I try to keep these down to 45 minutes or less so that I don't waste up all your time. We looked at review of subtractive synthesis, which means picking our oscillators, subtracting tone with a filter, subtracting volume with the ADSR envelope, and then using LFOs as a modulator to change multiple things at the same time, like pitch, like filter, like volume. It's good, Steve. Yo, Burke, man, you're making some crazy house tracks. So last step, as always, I want to show you where you can get this hands-on session lesson if you're curious about learning more about this on your own. Here is the member site, and it looks like, well, when you get to the inside page on the link, it'll look like this. And here we have a whole series of the essential basics of sound design. This used to be one course that I sold for a bigger price, but people like to do the modules one by one, so I broke them out into simple packages. And this one is the modulators lesson, which means you download an Ableton Live pack that opens up with instructions, examples, and activities. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you that right now. I want to show you what you get when you open up the Live pack. Essential Basics of Sound Design, LFO. Save changes, yes. Thanks to Andy May. He bought a couple of these and said they were really fun to play with and much better than watching on YouTube because it's interactive and you actually do it inside Live. So here's what you see when you open up the pack. There's a little welcome thing on the right side, but the main idea is to go to the top and press play. Welcome to the Essential Basics of Sound Design. This is the LFO lesson where we're going to learn about using low frequency oscillators as a modulator source to play with frequency and pitch. All right, so that's recorded inside the project. Like me, on video, that's me right here. But I recorded instructions for you to tell you what's going on with this lesson. For example, how do we play with it? The activities in this lesson happen on channel 1, so let's make sure you can see the controls. Select track 1 and do Shift-Tab so you can see the macro knobs. Those knobs are mapped to LFO parameters in the operator synth. Okay, does that look familiar? It does look familiar because we just played with it for this whole lesson. Now we go through here with activities, talking about all the stuff, you just kind of heard about it. LFO, I'm out. We've got an example. Watch this. Play the next scene, listen to the sound, and watch macro 1 as the LFO depth comes in. I love that sound. So what I'm doing here is I'm using automation as a teaching tool to show you how the instrument works. And then you get to do it right there inside live with the same exact sound, same exact controls. You don't get lost, you don't get confused. You don't have to try and recreate something that you see on YouTube, which is hard and takes a lot of pausing and everything. Play the next scene and use macro 1 to change the LFO amount as it affects. Okay? So now you actually get a hands-on example to grab that same macro knob, play with it at home, and get a sense of what it does. So you can actually connect the sound with how you make that sound. And then I talk about the theory. The original use of this was for vibrato. Then we go through LFO rate. We go through LFO range, aka how to beat match. LFO pitch wobble. What's that example sound like? Oh, it sounds like some Aphex Twin stuff. Then we go into LFO for filter modulation. You know, I just talked about this in the workshop, so you get the idea. But you can do it all in a hands-on guided session lesson. So you actually learn by doing it. And I give you some space to actually record your own ideas with these yellow clips. So if you're having such a good time and you're like, oh my gosh, this just gave me a creative idea, you can record it in the MIDI clip. You can even drop in some new audio channels, put some drum beats on there, and start a track right here from the session lesson. I want you to spark ideas. I want you to actually use this to make music. Talk about LFO retrigger and then review. LFO definition, what it is, modulators, rate, sync, sound source, all these kinds of things. And of course, your homework is to share your tracks in the Mix It Texture group. So what do? You go to the link that I'm going to give you in the member site, and there's a bunch of descriptions. I set this up as pay what you want because everybody's going through some weird times right now. 25 bucks is a deal for this lesson. It's absolutely going to give you ideas for music. But if that's a little tight on money, what you can do is type in, watch this, pay 20. Whoa, it goes down to $20. How about pay 15? Bam, price goes down to 15. Even pay 10, you could get this hands-on live pack for 10 bucks, which means you do download an Ableton live pack. It opens up with instructions, automation showing you what to do, and then activities to actually do it and learn by doing it to spark ideas to make music. You can pay with PayPal, you can pay with credit card, you can agree to the terms of service. I'm gonna put in pay for 15, that seems like a decent amount, and I guess you get the idea from now. So I'll put this link into the notes on this video with the coupon codes where you can pay what you want. Grab this lesson, download it, play with some sounds, make a beat, or even just make a sound, and share it with us in the Facebook group so we can comment, hear what you're doing, all that kind of stuff. That's what it's all about. I like making these lessons. I know you like watching them, so thanks for being here. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'll answer when I get a look at it. And for anybody on YouTube, I'm only answering comments on Facebook Live. Sorry about that. I do look at the YouTube later and check in on what's happening, but I can only comment in one place at a time because there's one brain and two hands, and that's what it's all about. Tomorrow, we're going to do the last step of Essential Basics of Sound Design with additive synthesis, which means combining layers to make a complicated sound that's got a bunch of stuff. Kind of like in my track when I showed you I had that bass, like that sub bass sound, and then a mid-range bass, both doing those wubs on two different channels because I wanted to hear it in the mix. Well, we could actually do that inside Operator with two oscillators and Operator stacked up in different octaves, same controls, same wubs, same sound, one instrument. So that's what it's all about. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll check you out tomorrow, or maybe tonight I might go live and do a little live mixing. We'll see. And that's what it's all about. Thanks for watching. Bye.